Let me check one more thing before we get started. Linda says hi. Okay, in order to respect everybody's time, and since we're recording the webinar, let's just get started and kick off the meeting. Well, thank you so much for everybody who joins us in today's webinar. We're very excited to be here with you. It's our first ever data webinar, and we've been preparing for weeks, and we're very excited that finally it's happening. Let me get started with a quick introduction of who we are. I'm trying to click on the slide and to get it into the next page, and it seems like there's a lag. Perfect. So who we are. My name is Isabella Kai. I am the founder and CEO of Y Montessori. And at Y Montessori, our mission is to advance Montessori education through innovative parent education, as well as powerful data storytelling. And with that mission in mind, we have developed two different services. The first one is called Montopia. So Montopia is an innovative parent education app designed for Montessori schools to educate and engage their parents. And we're very proud to share that we're able to achieve over 80% of parent engagement rate through the platform with all the schools that are on Montopia. The second program that we run is called Montessori Data Lens. And through Montessori Data Lens, we collect, analyze, and we publish monthly data reports. And the goal of that is to share different data insights that we discover and uncover from our work. We also provide customized contracted data services as well, also targeting in the Montessori community. And before we get into a quick introduction of the work that we've done so far, I want to quickly talk about why we start working on the Montessori Data Lens program. So I'm a Montessori mother, and of course, my daughters are the reason why I started getting into the Montessori field, but my background is in data. I have been working in as a data analyst for many years. And when I first started, Y Montessori, creating the parent education service or solution, I started attending a lot of conferences, and it was interesting that during those conferences, data has mentioned so many times. People talk about, data and how data is heavily needed in the Montessori community. And I start asking questions about what kind of data do people need and how can we help and support. Unfortunately, I was not able to get the answer that I want. And so I just, tell myself, let's launch a program, let's bring the data expertise that we have and to share with the community and keep the conversation going and trying to figure out what data does the community need and how we can help and support. So eventually we launched the Montessori Data Lens program early this year. And every month we publish one data infographics. And so far we've published 7 infographics already. The first one is the Montessori presence in the United States, where we map out over 5,000 Montessori schools in the United States, including public as well as private Montessori schools. The second report that we've done is focusing on in California, because through the first month of report, we realized that California has a lot of Montessori schools, and was trying to figure out why and what does it look like, on the deeper level about the Montessori community in California. So on the second month in February, we did a deep dive of Montessori's presence in California. The third month, we're very interested and curious about Montessori parents' experience. And so we conducted a survey, collected over 100 responses from Montessori parents, and trying to analyze and figure out what their challenges are, what their experience are, and what kind of things they hope to have. And that's where we published the March report focusing on Montessori parent survey. In our April report, we're very lucky to honored to collaborate with AMI USA to bring their annual conference, the Montessori Experience Conference Survey, to the wider audience, and trying to tell the story of who attends the Montessori conference, and also what kind of topics people talk about and what their general experience are. In May and also June and July report, we focus heavily on the public Montessori sectors. And so we had a collaboration with NCMPS looking into the current landscape of Montessori education in public sectors. And after that, we did a 40 years of historical trend analysis of public Montessori schools in the US. And after that, we figured it would be interesting to do a comparison between public Montessori school and traditional public schools in the US for the past 48 years. And that's where, for that past 3 months, we've been evolved, focused heavily around the topic of public Montessori education, as well as the comparison between that with the regular or traditional public education in the US. And this is going to be our topic today, sharing the insights that we uncovered for that past 3 months. Before we dive into the data and the insights that we're excited to share today, let's meet our team. So it has me, myself, part of the data team. We also have Marguerite, Brighton, and Caitlin, and I'm going to hand it over to them to introduce themselves before we jump into the details of the data.
Thank you, Isabella. Hi, everyone. My name is Marguerite Church. I'm a data analyst intern here at Montessori. I've been here for almost a year now. I'm going into my 4th year as a data science major at UCSD. And additionally, I was a Montessori student up through 6th grade. My mom's a Montessori teacher, so I've had a lot of fun working here this past year, being able to combine my interest in Montessori and data.
Hi, my name is Brighton Chan, and I'm working at Y Montessori for the past 3 months now, and I'm going into my senior year at UC San Diego as a data science major. I'm also the lead for the July projects, so I'm really excited to present the report to you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin Abelier. I'm also a data analyst intern here at Y Montessori for the past about 4 months now. I graduated from UCSD in data science for my bachelor's, and I'm now starting my first semester at UIUC, majoring in computer science with a focus on computational social science, focusing on things like demographics, education, and so this really ties in together all my interests as well. Alrighty, and I'll take it away now with an introduction to the data. So, for our data, for our 3 reports that we'll be covering today, our data on public schools in the U.S. spans from the school years 1986 to 87 to 2023-24 and was web scraped from the National Center for Education Statistics database under the Institute of Education Science, IES. In order to filter this data for public Montessori schools, we worked in partnership with the National Center for Montessori in the public sector to have a holistic list of Montessori schools as either a program within a school or for a school in its entirety. By combining together our databases on Montessori schools, we will define data with NCMPS for 510 out of 610 public Montessori schools and programs. So, the database covers public education in the United States and Puerto Rico, and it contains over 3.6 million rows of data, with each row representing a single school in a specific school year. Since, of course, most schools operate for multiple school years, the same school will likely appear multiple times in the dataset. Displayed is a quick subset of our actual data, and the entirety of this database is used for our July report. Our June report filters for only Montessori schools, and our May report follows the latest school year data for public Montessori schools, school year 2023 to 24. For a view of this data on your own, you can take a look at NC as its table generator and follow the categories and columns listed above. And it is important to note the following disclaimers. NCMPS has actively maintained their database of public Montessori schools through regular communication, whether it be phone calls, emails, or other forms of communication. We, Y Montessori, are not involved in this process. Additionally, 38% of our data is for schools with a Montessori program within the school, where Montessori is only a subset of the school's data. NCES does not provide a way to filter out data for just these programs, and if we chose to filter out these 143 programs entirely for solely Montessori enrollment data, so it would heavily impact the school count accuracy and overall geographic spread of public Montessori schools in the US. Thus, their data, along with their non-Montessori students, is included as Montessori with the statistical assumption that the demographic spread of the school is representative of the sample. Next, you may recall that not all public schools from our database combined with NCMPS were found to have NCES data. So for those 100 public Montessori schools without NCES data, we found that a majority of those missing schools could be explained by the school never registered for an NCES ID, the school was founded after the 2023-24 school year, which is the most recent published data, and thirdly, the Montessori program is operated by a public school district and not hosted at one particular school. And our last disclaimer is that NCMPS provided us data on the year a public Montessori school was founded. Schools with no year founded date provided are assumed by us and by NCMPS to have always been Montessori. And any data on a school prior to its Montessori founding year is, of course, not considered as Montessori data. And with that, if there are no questions on our database, we can move into our June report. Taking it away will be Marguerite. Oh, sorry, May report. Taking it away will be Marguerite.
Thank you, Caitlin. This is our May report. Once again, it's just on the public Montessori school presence in the 2023-2024 school year. So moving over to Tableau Public so we can see all of the interactive features this report has. It looks like a lot at the beginning, but I'll give you a quick overview to help make it more palatable. So we start with a map. This can also be used as a fun filter if you want to see statistics for different states. And then we have our overview, features information on the types of schools, the locale they can be found in. Demographics has information about race and gender data, as well as overall enrollment numbers. Student-teacher ratio found in the classroom section, along with grade span and student enrollment. So going back to our map, all of the states in blue have at least one Montessori school. The numbers are kind of small, but the numbers in the middle are actually the exact number of public Montessori schools that state has. And the yellow dots represent the individual schools. So you can see for some states, they all kind of clump together. Like in Michigan, it'll be down near Detroit, California, like the Bay, and then down here. And our top states for the most public Montessori schools are South Carolina, California, and then Texas. And South Carolina actually has 58 public Montessori schools, which is kind of crazy. Now, moving down to overview, we have the different types of schools, charter, magnet, district, or other. District schools are the most common at 43%, and these are just like traditional public schools managed by the district. They have the least amount of freedom when it comes to how they teach the kids, and they have the standards set specifically by the district. Next most popular is charter at 36%. Charter schools have the most freedom out of all of these. They can be privately run, but still free tuition, public, fit in the overall public bubble. And then magnet has 14% and others just 6.7. Moving on to where these schools can be found, over half, 53%, can be found in cities. And this seems like a large amount of schools, but if you take a step back and think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense because districts that only have one public school, like smaller districts, is probably not going to be Montessori. Montessori public schools will be found in those districts where there are multiple schools, so parents have the option to go a traditional public route or public Montessori. So the next popular is suburb with around quarter of these schools, and then rural 13%, and town is the smallest at just under 10%. Moving on to the demographics information. Each line represents a different race. So we have white, American Indian / Alaskan Native, Asian, Black, Hispanic, 2 or more races. So for all the public Montessori schools in the US, it looks like majority white at around 40%. And then we have Hispanic a little over quarter, and Black is a little under quarter. But this is a cool one to look at on a state-by-state basis, because we can see if we move to Texas, Hispanic takes the majority at a little over 56%, and white moves down to 16. Moving down to this gender distribution, there's a higher percentage of male students than female students in these schools at 51.2%. And we also feature our total enrollment number here, which is just over 200,000 public Montessori school students. Up here in this visualization features the student-teacher ratio. So we have 0 to 10 students to 1 teacher, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40. 10 to 20 is definitely the most popular ratio, and this is a fun visualization to look at because each of these dots represents a single school, and the size of the dot relates to the number of students that school has. So hovering over the specific dots will reveal a specific school. It's kind of hard when we're looking at all the schools because there's so many, but if we click on a specific state here, like Pennsylvania, we can see all 6 of their schools fall into the most common ratio, and we can actually hover and see the specific ratios that each of these schools have. So moving back to the overall picture, we have our grade span visualization. On the left, we have the starting grade of each school, and the size of the bar is proportionate to the number. So you can see there's majority pre-K and kindergarten schools. And then on the right, we have the final grade with 5th, 6th, 8th, and 12th being the most popular. And then the lines connecting them, the width corresponds to the percentage of schools that fit into that age range, like pre-K to 8. And pre-K to 8 is actually the most popular school length, and about a quarter of public Montessori schools start at pre-K and end in 8th grade. So, and then moving on to our last visualization, it's student enrollment has a large skew to the right, indicating the majority of schools are in the 0 to 500 student range, but some make it out to the 1900 students. So the most common enrollment numbers are 2 to 300 with 19%, but there's the largest chunk is definitely in the 0 to 600 grouping. So my 3 main takeaways from this analysis would be: 1, South Carolina dominates the Montessori public school number count, which is really fun to see. 2, cities, these schools can mainly be found in cities, over half of them are. And 3, most common start grade is pre-K, and most common end grade is 8th grade, and a quarter of schools fit into these categories. So those are my takeaways, and now I'll open it up to questions if we have any. If not, I'll pass it over to Caitlin for an overview of our June report.
Thank you so much, Marguerite, for those awesome insights from our May report. Feel free, everyone, to message any questions you have in the chat if you weren't able to ask or if some come up later in mind. And we'll also have time at the end for a little Q&A if you have questions you want to say out loud in person. Or sorry, through your mic. But next, we'll be moving into our June report, which covers historical trends in U.S. public Montessori schools. So, opening it up here, there's quite a lot displayed on this screen right now, so I'll take you a little bit through what's going on before we get started with the visualizations. So, to the left here, we have our navigation bar. We have several visualizations separated into different pages, 8 total, covering overview of the United States, state-based analyses, enrollment numbers, teacher numbers, gender and race distributions, types of schools, and school locations. If you are familiar with our July report, you may have noticed that state-based analyses, gender and race distributions, and school locations are covered in our comparative report, so I'll only be going over the remaining 4 to prevent repetitiveness in today's webinar. And to the right of our navigation bar, you can see that we can control what year we are looking at. Whether you want to look at a specific year, so you can open up the drop-down menu, skip to a couple of years with these arrows, or if we go all the way back to the beginning, we can click our lovely play button to watch as the animation progresses over the years. So starting us off with our overview visualization, public Montessori schools in the U.S. began at just 73 schools in 1986, with Puerto Rico actually being our lead with 36 Montessori schools. As time progressed, we soon broke 100 in 1993, and eventually will pass 500 schools in 2020. At an average growth of 14 schools per year, additional states also joined the public Montessori sector, and our current leads of South Carolina, California, and Texas begin to pop out. So you'll see those 3 states begin to darken as they become our leads. So next, we'll take a peek at enrollment numbers over the years, where, as it loads in, we'll see a steady increase of an average of 5,030 students per year. Our only dip in enrollment at a magnitude of 5,309 students can be found during 2020, which, as many of you know, was the beginning of the COVID pandemic. It didn't take long for public Montessori to bounce back from this dip, and a full recovery was made within 2 years, and the numbers are still gradually climbing after the fact. So as we reach the 2020s, you'll see that little dip, our only little dip, but by here, we have surpassed the previous number, and there's a continuous, gradual increase. In parallel, when we take a look at teacher numbers, we have steady growth in those as well. So as we play this visualization, we'll see that the steepest jump in teacher numbers is over 1,000 teachers between 2017 and 2018. Interestingly, contrary to enrollment numbers, the only decline we see is a modest dip of 8 teachers between 2013 and 2014, which is pretty negligible considering the overall upward trend. And even during 2020, when student enrollment dropped due to the pandemic, Montessori teacher numbers held steady, suggesting schools made a deliberate effort to maintain staff with a strong commitment to maintaining educators and resources for students returning in subsequent years. So great job, Montessori schools, for keeping that up. Next, we'll take a look at types of schools, which is the final visualization I'll be covering for the June report, again, to reduce repetitiveness. So before we dive into this, I will elaborate on what these labels mean. Primary schools are defined as spanning from pre-K to 8th grade. Middle school schools span from 4th to 11th. High schools spanning from 7th to 12th, and other schools cover grade ranges outside of these standard conventions. So maybe from 1st grade to 12th grade, or from 1st grade to 9th grade, something that's not within those normal grade spans. And as expected, and as Marguerite sort of mentioned, primary schools dominate the space, consistently being in the 70% or 80% of our school coverage. But middle and high schools have maintained their small presence. Although small, there was never a year where they went to 0% and completely disappeared from the data set. So that wraps up our overall coverage of the June visualizations, with the three main highlights being South Carolina leads in school count, of course, but Puerto Rico held up the lead until 2013 and continues to maintain a large presence in public Montessori education. And secondly, despite the long-lasting effects of the COVID pandemic to school infrastructure, Montessori schools completely bounced back in enrollment within 2 years and continues to steadily grow. And lastly, on the contrary to enrollment, teacher numbers continue to climb, maintaining a stable and proportionate number of resources for the public Montessori sector. Do we have any quick questions in the chat before we move into the next one? If there are no questions, I'll move us into the July report, led and presented by Brighton, but feel free to still send those in the chat and we'll do our best to respond to you.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, as Caitlin mentioned, feel free to ask any questions in the chat so we can respond it after we present our reports. Yeah, so, all right. Let's dive right into the July report. All right. So our July report is similar to the June report, where we're working with time series data, where you can see trends from 1986 all the way to 2023. But the only difference is that we're actually comparing between public Montessori schools and public non-Montessori schools. So the features are pretty similar in the July report. You can see if you press the play forward button, you're gonna see all the data points pop out from 1986 to 2023. And we also have 8 visualizations here. So these are all buttons where you can press, and it's gonna lead you to the page for that particular visualizations. So the 8 visualizations include the comparison between the number of schools, as you can see here. The next one's gonna be states, and then we're gonna have enrollment, race, gender, locale, student-teacher ratio, and last but not least, we also have a visualization that shows schools that switched from non-Montessori to Montessori. All right, so let's get right into it. So first visualization would be the number of schools. So as you can see, let me press this button right here. Yeah, so for Montessori schools, there's a 87% increase from 1986 all the way to 2023. In exact numbers, it would be starting from 73 schools in 1986, and it ended with 546 in 2023. And also something to note is that every year, the Montessori community has seen growth in Montessori public schools. So never is there a year where it declined. So that's pretty impressive. Whereas for non-Montessori, there's also a growth, but not as big. So overall, over the years, there's a 15% increase for non-Montessori. So in 1986, there's around 85,000 schools, whereas in 2023, just a little bit over 100,000. And you can also see there's also noticeable dips in years 2011, 2019, right here, and 2023 right here. Yeah, so this would be the number of schools comparison. All right, so next up, it would be our state-based comparison. So if you look at the Montessori side, you see one outlier stands out. So that's Puerto Rico. And in the year 1986, it actually already has 36 Montessori schools. But as you see, as the chart moves on, Puerto Rico didn't didn't increase a whole lot. In fact, it went down a little bit and then went back up. And in 2023, it has 39 Montessori schools, which has the lowest growth rate out of all the US states. Whereas if you look at the left two most states, which is South Carolina and Texas, they have shown the most growth out of every state throughout the years. So for instance, in South Carolina, right here, it actually started with seven Montessori schools in 1990, and it reached all the way up to here. Oops. There we go. To 54 in 2023. Whereas for Texas, it gets even crazier. Texas actually had only one Montessori school in 1986, and it rose all the way up to 41 in 2023. Whereas for the non-Montessori side, Nevada has the highest growth rate at around 155%. Puerto Rico also has a really steep decline in non-Montessori schools, which has around a 51% decrease. For the US state side, it would be Nebraska, which went from around 1,500 schools in 1986 down to around 1,000 non-Montessori public schools in 2023. So moving on to student enrollment. So for student enrollment, our measurement is based on the percentage. So this percentage right here means the percentage of Montessori students relative to the total number of public school students in the US. And for the non-Montessori side, it will be the percentage of non-Montessori students relative to the total number of public school students. As you can see, for Montessori schools, it has increased year by year, just like the number of schools. So in 1986, only 0.07% of the total number of public school students went to Montessori schools. Whereas in 2023, it rose all the way up to 0.41%. I know this number is not that crazy, but at least we're still seeing growth. And for non-Montessori side, it looks kind of flat here, but it's actually showing a little bit of decline with 99.93% of non-Montessori students as a whole in 1986, and in 2023, it would be 99.59%. So a slight decrease in percentage. Right. So next up would be the race distribution chart. So if you look at the race distribution, Hispanic students started really low in the Montessori side, but you see here, there's a sudden increase in 1992. This is because of the addition of Puerto Rico data, where Puerto Rico has a lot of Hispanic student population in Montessori schools. Whereas for Montessori schools, white has been the dominant race with around 35 to 40% every year. And also, there's also a significant amount of Black students in Montessori schools, around 25 to 30% every year. Whereas on the non-Montessori side, white students also dominate the population, but this time with around 45 to 55% of the population. Whereas Black students showed completely opposite than Montessori, where there's only around 15% of Black students in non-Montessori public schools. So this is the biggest difference between Montessori and non-Montessori students in terms of race. Okay, and then gender. Yeah, so for gender data, you wouldn't see anything until the year 1998 because we don't have data until then. But as the year moves on, you will see that for Montessori schools, the gender distribution is around 50-50, 50% male and 50% female. Whereas for non-Montessori, for every year, there's slightly more male students than female students, which aligns with the US population census for people under 18 years of age, as most people go to public schools in the US. And then moving on to locale. All right. So for locale, the majority of Montessori public schools are located in cities, with 53.5% in large, mid-sized, or small cities as of 2023. And it reached its peak at 69% of Montessori public schools being in cities in 2004. Rural schools has been increasing from 4% in 1987 to 13% in 2023. However, it's still not as high as public non-Montessori schools. As we'll see later, in non-Montessori schools, you can see that rural, suburban, and city are pretty evenly distributed for non-Montessori schools. So we can see there's a higher percentage of rural schools, especially in non-Montessori schools, compared to Montessori. As Marguerite also mentioned that it's because of some rural districts probably only has 1 or 2 public schools in that district. So they would most likely assign that school to a non-Montessori in a non-Montessori format instead of a Montessori format. So that's why you'll see a huge difference in rural locale for non-Montessori and Montessori. And then next up would be student-teacher ratio. So the data for student-teacher ratio is available starting in 1998 as well. So you wouldn't see any data points at the start. But as the years go on, you would see an overall trend, overall decreasing trend for both Montessori and non-Montessori schools. In most years, Montessori schools has a higher student-teacher ratio than non-Montessori schools, as obviously Montessori promotes student self-learning and development. So there's less teacher influence in that area aspect. So, however, in 1999 and 2001, non-Montessori schools has a higher student-teacher ratio, which is pretty interesting. And last but not least, our last visualization shows schools that switch from non-Montessori to Montessori. A little disclaimer here is that we define a school switch from non-Montessori to Montessori when it was classified as non-Montessori in 1986, or at the time it was being added to the data set, and it switched to Montessori after that. Therefore, it is possible that some of the schools switched to Montessori before 1986, and we just weren't able to tell that because we didn't have the data then. But in this chart, something really interesting to see is that in the year 2023, 40% of public Montessori schools actually began as non-Montessori schools. And before the year 2000, right here, 25% of the schools already switched before the year 2000. But as you can see, after the year 2000, the trend has kind of slowed down. But it doesn't mean it's still going up. So it's still on an uptrend. It's just not going as fast as it used to be. Yep. So that's it for the July report. 3 main takeaways for me is obviously the 40% of non-Montessori schools that switched to Montessori schools over the years. The second main takeaway would be the student-teacher ratio visual that shows that Montessori schools generally has a higher student-teacher ratio than non-Montessori schools. And last but not least, another really fun fact is the significant higher Black population in Montessori schools compared to non-Montessori schools. Yep, so this is pretty much it for the July report. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute or put it in the chat. All right.
This is Swan. Sorry, I have one
Yeah.
quick question.
Sure.
When you talk about non-Montessori, that would be traditional public school system,
Yeah.
right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And when you say 40% from non-Montessori
Yeah.
school to Montessori school, is it those non-Montessori school, traditional school converted into Montessori program?
Yeah,
So,
that's correct.
so that's where, okay.
Yeah, so 40% of the current public Montessori schools were used to be non-Montessori, like traditional ones.
Okay. Do you know which state that's convert the most from traditional Montessori to Montessori?
Not from this report, but we can definitely do something with that because all we have to do is add a filter, but we didn't have a state filter for this particular report, but we can definitely do that in the future.
Oh, okay, thank you. Because I know I'm from Massachusetts, and I
Yeah.
know one school, it took them like maybe 3 or 4 years to completely
Mhm.
convert from traditional public to Montessori schools. That's the only one school I've known. But okay, thank you.
Yeah, we can definitely look into that. We just have to add a filter. Mhm. All right. If there's no further questions, we can move on to Caitlin, who will present the Puerto Rico data.
Thank you so much, Brian, for all those awesome insights and detailed takeaways from our July report. Now, as we've explained, we are going to now present some exclusive content that is not yet published, and it is on Puerto Rico. Now, because it is unpublished work, it may take some time to load on Tableau, so I thank you for your patience as we present this report. And if you're interested in other state breakdowns or having this report for yourself, please reach out to us. We're more than happy to provide our state breakdown services to you all. Alrighty, so as you can see, it's very similarly structured to our July report. We have a few visualizations here that we're going to cover. It's going to be school counts, enrollment numbers, race, gender, locale, and then student-teacher ratios. The other visualizations that we saw in the previous main July report are not included because they cover either the US as a whole, and that's integral to it. And you may have noticed that percentage switched is not included because, as we mentioned before, not a lot of Puerto Rico Montessori schools were added, and in fact, sometimes declined over the years. So we'll be focusing on just these 5 topics. Now, starting off with school counts. Let me rewind this for you all. As mentioned previously again by Brighton in his report, the number of public Montessori schools in Puerto Rico has fluctuated. While its presence has persevered with a gradual growth since 1986, there are some declines in the early 1990s and again around 2014. It has maintained a significant presence with 39 schools by 2023, and it has fully recovered from these dips, but again, not a significant growth rate compared to our other leading schools. And on the contrary, we see a great decline in public non-Montessori schools, peaking at 1,720 schools back in 1987, the second year of our data, and it has only fallen since then, reaching just 819 by 2023. At its lowest. What began as a gradual decline accelerated sharply after 2014. So great difference here for Puerto Rico. Slight incline here and a great decline here. Moving next into enrollment. As that loads, the enrollment data loads, I do want to mention that it's possible that the great decline in traditional non-Montessori schooling in Puerto Rico signifies that Montessori was able to withstand and persevere through natural disasters and other events in its territory. As for the student enrollment comparison, much like school counts, there is a steady rise in enrollment, but from 2.01% of public education students in 1986 to 4.29% in 2023. So this underscores the growth and strong presence of Montessori's presence in Puerto Rico because, as you may recall from our early reports, in overall US, it is only 0.4% of the US where students are enrolled in Montessori. This grows by tenfold in Puerto Rico. And on the contrary, non-Montessori schools were once 97 to 98% of students and has declined by 5% to 95.71% in 2023. And again, similar to as I previously mentioned, the enrollment loss and school closures can be resulting from natural disasters and the pandemic, thus highlighting Montessori's strength and resilience to not only stabilize but grow through these events. Next, moving into race. Thank you for your patience as this loads. So our race numbers, as expected, is predominantly Hispanic in the territory of Puerto Rico. In fact, I've scaled the graph here, so this top line is 2%. We're going to see that for the first decade, I believe about a decade and a half, once the data starts being recorded in the 1992, is 100% Hispanic. We see that everything else remains at 0 until, I believe, close to 2013 is when other races and diversification kicks in. So white is our second leading race in Puerto Rico, and we see some American Indian, Native Americans here, and some Asian Pacific Islanders, some Black, but seldom do we ever see 2 or more races or Native Hawaiians in the Puerto Rico data, and this is, of course, reflecting on both Montessori and non-Montessori schools. There are some marginal increases in white and some fluctuations overall, but it maintains second highest. Moving into gender. So we'll see enrollment for both Montessori and non-Montessori, like the rest of the US population, is pretty evenly male and female. And again, gender, much like race, is not recorded in our data until later years. So it'll kick in shortly. But I do want to express that the male percentage is about 1% greater than in the overall US. This is because the school age population in Puerto Rico is slightly higher in males in comparison to females. Interestingly, the overall population for Puerto Rico is more females than males. You have to take a look specifically at school-age children to see why it is predominantly males. Next, in locale. So locale here is greatly suburb in both Montessori and non-Montessori. You'll see here that the data for locale actually doesn't start until 2005, 2006. So there's not much data showing the changes, but suburb continues to be the dominating space, followed by city. Now for non-Montessori, it tends to be more rural in comparison to town, and in Montessori schools, it is evenly rural and town. For some definition clarification, towns are farther away from a city center and sparser in population than rural cities or rural areas. And lastly, as a rule in student-teacher ratios, we will see here. Again, like our previous visualization, the data doesn't kick in until later years, so we don't have data going back to 1986. It starts around 1996, and the median student-teacher ratios for Puerto Rico's public schools has steadily declined over the past 2 decades, from around 15:1 in the late 1990s to roughly 10:1 by 2023. While Montessori education traditionally favors slightly higher ratios, promote student independence and peer learning, as Brighton has mentioned, these schools show ratios very similar to non-Montessori schools in recent years. Temporary increases, such as around 2011 to 2012, could likely reflect short-term enrollment or staffing shifts, but the overall downward trend suggests smaller classroom sizes, greater individualized resources and attention, and there is potential for these shifts in not only Puerto Rico, but overall US to be because of policy changes. And that concludes all of our reports, including our exclusive content on Puerto Rico. Does anyone have any questions? or would like us to go back to any particular visualization as we open up the floor to our overall Q&A? Feel free to unmute, send something in the chat. If anyone's watching through our Facebook live stream, there is a bit of a 20-second delay, so we might get to you delayed, but we will answer.
Hi, this is Swan again. I have a quick questions on this teacher-student ratio. What do you find the exact, or well, maybe not exact number, but what was the student ratio in the Montessori that you find is at most 20 to 2, 24 to 2 teachers, something like that? And also, what are the teacher-student ratios in a traditional public school?
The most common, I believe Marguerite covered this, was it 10 to 20 or 20 to 30 students to one teacher?
For the 2023-24 school year, it was between 10 and 20 students per one teacher.
Okay.
So that was what was most present for Montessori schools in our latest data. We have not looked particularly towards the non-Montessori space. We can look into that, just like how you asked about state breakdowns beforehand. And you're also free to reach out to us as well if you have any other questions regarding to something that's not included in these reports. If they require a filter, that's something we need to do personally on our end.
Thank you.
But that was a good question. After all, it is covering the median in our July and our Puerto Rico reports. So it's definitely something we could look into in the future. Any other questions from anyone?
I love questions, so I'm gonna ask.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, do you guys find any other reasons for the decline in the enrollment besides the natural disasters like COVID or anything that caused
Is
the
this
decline?
specific to Puerto Rico?
To any school. Well, okay, Puerto Rico besides the disasters.
If specific to Puerto Rico, from the research I had done personally, most articles cover that the decline in non-Montessori schools is due to natural disasters, hence why there's a favoritism towards Montessori because it relies on community and it's generally stronger in the areas where they are working together without a lot of other resources. And the shutdowns, again, were mainly attributed to natural disasters. But as for schools beyond Puerto Rico, we have not yet done specific analyses on any particular county or state. That is something we could look into in the future if you want to reach out and do a state breakdown for you. But we can assume there's possible policy changes as well, or maybe regional, local government implementations that might have attributed to it. Again, there could be plenty of confounding factors that can cause either a rise or a decline.
You guys did a wonderful job. Thank you for presenting the data. It's really interesting to see the increase and the decrease in the score. For the future, will you be studying, well, before I ask that, for the data, so all the data collected are just from the NCES. Okay,
Yes.
and those are just the quantitative data, right? Will you be doing any qualitative data and present it later on in the future?
That is something we could potentially look into in our future data reports. That might be a question that Isabella might be able to answer more specifically.
Yeah, so Swan, thank you so much for your question. I think it's a great question and also a feedback too. And one of the reasons we're doing the webinar is because we've done some reports already and we share it with the community through social media as well as email, but we kind of also figure out it's the best if we can get people together and just talk about it through conversations. And one of the reason we're trying to do more of the webinar is trying to figure out what kind of needs out there, in the community regarding the data work that we're doing. So regarding your question, is there any specific topics that you're thinking about with the quantitative analysis or qualitative analysis?
The qualitative analysis, I would be thinking more of like comparison for the students compared to the Montessori students through observations, data, and through the improvement enhancement versus non-public school system based on their curriculum. How did they learn? Did they improve? That kind of qualitative through observations data.
That's actually a great feedback because we've done all the reports for the past few months, and the most recent one we're doing right now, which will be ready mid this month, is the AI competencies mapping. So mapping the AI competencies with the Montessori materials. So what we did was we take the book written by Kate Broughton, and we kind of create an interactive dashboard trying to visualize and inform people about how a Montessori classroom prepares the child's development in the AI competencies. So we're starting to explore more of the area of, besides the quantitative data, how we can bring the bigger picture and the benefits of Montessori education in front of educators as well as parents and the broader education community. So that's something that we kind of started exploring lately, but we're definitely interested in seeing, some of the resources talking about observations and students' performance. I don't know whether there's any resources that will be available that you can share with us, and we can potentially look into it and see whether we can bring our data work into those areas in the future.
Great, that's awesome. No, I don't have any resource in mind at this moment, but because I am also a researcher myself,
Okay.
and a Montessori educator in early childhood educations,
Mhm.
and I thought it was interesting that as a Montessori educators, we always observe and we always keep that as a part of a qualitative data, and then we're going to map out where the child improve or not improve because they have 3-year cycle with us.
Right.
And I'm looking into doing the qualitative aspect of it, including not just only academic, but also for the emotional component with it, and also the social emotional component.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yes.
I love to stay connected, and maybe we can set up a separate call to have a discussion about this because we do see the value of it. And very often when we're trying to highlight the benefits of Montessori education, it's difficult through quantitative analysis and through observation and how we record the child's development in classroom. Maybe we can do some text analysis to potentially highlight the benefits. So we'd love to explore more in the area.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because that's what I'm doing right now, taking all the observations text and turn that into a quantitative
cool.
data and try to do the analysis behind it. But anyway, thank you so much. You guys you do a great job. So thank you.
Thank you so much. So we want to be mindful about the time. Well, thank you everybody who joined us today in the webinar. I hope that you have some interesting insights and takeaways from today's webinar. And feel free to reach out to us. I'm going to put the contact info, dataviz@ymontessori.com, and then we're going to send out the recording as well as the slide deck to everybody who registered for the webinar today. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Send us your feedback and thoughts and any potential topics that you'd like us to explore in the future. Yeah, great job, team, and thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. You have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.